Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to take a look at a couple of endgame studies that I think are really interesting. So let's just jump straight in. The screen in front of you already displays the first position we will explore. It is white to play here, and I'd urge you to maybe pause the video and just take a moment to understand what is going on here. The white pawn is going up the board like this. Now, the first thing that I'd recommend doing is just taking a look at what's going on, right? So we have two pieces and a pawn. Black has one piece and a pawn. So we are currently up a piece, and that gives us winning chances. But the issue is clear. Both the knight and our bishop is hanging, and if we were to lose one of them, then the material gets equal, right? So if we save the bishop, we lose the knight, material's equal, this is likely to end in a draw. Similarly, if we save the knight, we lose the bishop, material is equal. Again, a draw is a very likely result. So we need to be a bit more strategic and find a way to maximize the potential of our pieces. So the first move in this puzzle, which should make some sense, is the move knight c2. Now, what's the idea? Well, the point is, now if you were to take the bishop, we are taking advantage of the fact that the knight in the corner is hanging. So we're still going to be up a piece and win the game. The question becomes, well, okay, what if they just trade? The issue is if they trade, now our king is better placed, right? We can go king to d5, and there's nothing they can do. We're going to pick up the pawn and promote next. So they can't trade, they can't take the bishop. There's one sneaky approach, and very often in endgame studies, it's not only a matter of finding the best move for you, for white, but it's also a matter of finding the best response to keep the game going. And here, that ideal response happens to be knight to b3. Now, this looks a little bit shocking because you're kind of leaving the tension here, but the point is, the knight is relying on the bishop's defense, and so the bishop's attacked, but if the bishop just moves somewhere, well, you lose the knight, and again, the game becomes drawn. And so knight to b3 poses a very specific threat. We're threatening the bishop. If you move it, we're threatening the knight. How can you respond? And I think this move here is perhaps the key resource that you need to find because it is really spectacular. So the move is knight to a1. And the idea is kind of shocking. Well, first of all, both the bishop and the knight are hitting the opposing knight, and so if they were to take the bishop, we can just take the knight and win the game. So their best option seems to be, well, okay, let's just take the knight in the corner. We're also saving, therefore, our piece, and we're equalizing the game. Shouldn't this be a draw? No, and the reason is piece activity. The knight on a1, we have dragged it back there because now the bishop completely dominates all of its escape squares. And so after bishop a4, the knight is trapped. Also, our king, as we kind of saw earlier, is closer to the pawns in the center, and therefore, black is totally busted, right? Their knight can't come in and do anything meaningful, and similarly, their king is just too far away. So we can kind of explore this quickly. If they were to try to take out their knight from danger, and they were to play knight to c2, here we snap the knight, of course, and we use our extra activity to win the game. We're going to pick up the pawn, and it doesn't take much to see that this is going to be a win. So after bishop a4, they can't go knight c2. Their best option is probably king to c3, but this doesn't help much, right? We can go king to d5, and after king to b4, they're hitting the bishop, they're defending the pawn. It seems good, but all we have to do here is just bring the bishop back to d1. And we can basically jump between these two squares because at both points we are restricting the knight's mobility. This is why a knight in the corner of the board is such a tragic situation. It just can't come into the game. And so bishop d1, you can still not trade because, you know, any trade here will allow for the simplification into the winning endgame. So what does black do? I mean, I suppose they can go king a5 and try to kind of come around, but again, it doesn't take much to see that this is just not going to end well. We can start pushing, we can keep pushing all the way up. Now, usually this would be a stalemate here if we didn't have the other pieces because king to c6 is stalemate, but luckily the knight in the corner is not only just a terrible piece, but it also gives black an extra tempo that they now have to use. It doesn't matter where the knight goes. We don't take it, of course, which would be stalemate. We go bishop, check on g4, mate. So a nice study, I think, to start us off. There's going to be one more that we'll look at, but just to kind of summarize what's going on here, we take advantage of a few things. The undefended nature of the knight on a1. This move, knight c2, takes advantage of that because we'd still be up material in the case for the trades. That's one thing. Secondly, we take advantage of just the terrible and poor placement of a knight on a1. When you look at the main line after knight b3, we drag the knight back there. Voluntarily, we kind of give back a piece, but by doing so, we are just restricting all of their pieces, and it is the extra mobility and activity of our pieces that guarantee the win. So a nice puzzle to start us off. Let's jump to the next. Okay, position 2. This time we are looking at a pawn endgame, because who does not like pawn endgames? And here, with the white side again, try to find the way to win. This is the only option that you have, the only path forward, and it's a really, I think, instructive idea and example. So pause the video if you'd like. White to play here. What's the win? Now, how do we go about trying to conceptualize this? Well, I think this is what I would do. Okay, material is equal, right? Both sides have 3 pawns to their name, but our king is miserable here, right? We're so far away from the action. And therefore, if we just try to like activate the king or kind of do something random, they're going to take 1 pawn, then the next, and then they're just going to be able to promote really either pawn or any pawn that they wish. And therefore, we have to do something a bit more direct. And now we consider, how can we potentially get a passed pawn? Because in an endgame with pawns on the board, that is your only goal, right? If you can give away every single pawn that you might have as long as you get 1 pawn to promote. And so a passed pawn, which if you don't know is just a pawn that doesn't have any opposing pawns on the files next to it, and therefore can kind of easily get back to the back rank and promote, this is a very valuable thing. And so we want to get a passed pawn. Now, we want to look at these pawns and try to figure out in what way can we get a passed pawn. Now, it's probably not going to be one of these. And why do I say that? Because these are very well guarded by the pawns and, importantly, by the king as well, right? And so even if we, like, sacrifice some pawns and somehow get one of these pawns to be passed, the king is just going to be right there to pick it up. And so we look at the f pawn. And this is the pawn that we want to very much prioritize here, because not only does it potentially have the ability to become a passed pawn if we were to remove this defender on e7, but also importantly, it is far away from the opposing king, and therefore if it does become a passed pawn, that could be a very dangerous passed pawn indeed. And so this is kind of the map that we have in our head. We want to get this pawn up there, but there's a pawn in the way. Okay, wait a minute, d6, right? We sacrifice, well, we're not even really sacrificing here the pawn, and if they were to take, well, we actually are sacrificing it because we're not going to capture back. That would give black the appropriate time to bring their king back into the action. Instead, we drag the pawn away, and now we push f5. Right, and they can take here, okay, now we push f6. And the pawn's marching, it's going to promote and be decisive. And so after d6, it looks like we're winning, right? They're going to take, then we push, but you can never count on the opponent to playing into your ideas, right? So here they're not going to take. That's the whole point. They're going to instead go e6. And by doing so, they're watching over f5. You can't get that in. You can't get c6 because they can just take it with the king. What do? It looks like now you are indeed busted, and you are, right? So d6 is not the correct first move. So now you potentially are just going to look at some of the other options you have, right? d6 didn't work. What about c6? Okay, let's say they take. I think this is very natural. Now, if we were to take, we have not achieved anything, right? The king is still active. We don't have a passed pawn. Game over. We're losing. But what if after they take, we don't take, but now we go d6? Well, okay, it becomes obvious if they take, we have that same position as before, where f5 is going to guarantee a promotion. Just to kind of put this on the board, so you believe me, the king is not fast enough to catch the pawn on the f-file. So they're not going to take, they're going to go e6, but here's the difference, right? This is why we played c6 to drag the pawn away from d7. Now the d6 pawn is a passed pawn of its own right, and it can cause indeed some very significant damage. d7, d8, queen wins the game. So, okay, c6 looks promising, right? If they were to push, we can just push. If they were to take, we can push, and one of these pawns is going to be a pass pawn, right, regardless of what they do. So what are their options? Well, their best move is probably to ignore the tension and go king to b6. But here, we do the same thing we did before. We go d6. Again, if they were to take, we've dragged away the e-pawn, and therefore the f-pawn is free to run down the board and promote. By the way, the king indeed can catch the pawn this time, but the point is we have two pass pawns, right? So we can use one of them to distract the king while we guarantee the safe promotion of the other. And so the final thing maybe to consider is, well, okay, if they take, we promote, we win. What happens if they push instead? And here we can just take on d7 and we also win, right? The king can no longer come to the critical c7 square and guard the promotion. The d8 queen is coming on the board on the next move and we win. And so I think these endgame studies, which are extremely practical, I think when you think of studies, you often think of maybe, 10 queens on the board or something kind of unrealistic. So the fact that these are realistic, A, is quite beneficial to your chess because you can get a very similar situation in some pawn endgame, but B, they reinforce an idea that if you've seen before is very important to kind of get a reminder on. And if you haven't, then this is a very important introduction to this concept of getting a passed pawn, right? Doing a pawn breakthrough, essentially, where you sacrifice one or two pawns. In some cases, there's examples of sacrificing more pawns in order to get that one promotion safe on the other side of the board. So, ladies and gentlemen, that will wrap up the video for today. I'm very thankful that you joined me in our exploration on some of these studies. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you are new around here. Like this video if you enjoy what you see, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.